French market is quite big and you can build an amazing company just in France. So think twice about going international.
No competition doesn't actually mean an easy ride into a new market.
This is Next Market Live, the podcast by Weglot.
We're bringing you the unfiltered stories of CEOs, CMOs, and go-to-market pros who've taken their brands beyond their home markets.
From the first, where do we start, to major pivots and unexpected challenges, we explore how international growth
is rarely a straight line.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Next Market Live, the podcast by Weglot.
I'm Elizabeth, Head of Brand and Content here at Weglot, and this is Eugène, CMO at Weglot.
Today, we are joined by Quentin Debavelaere. Quentin is the former operator and expansion lead at Malt.
His educational background is in engineering, and after several years in strategy consultancy at McKinsey, he joined Malt, as a late founder, with a focus on operations and go-to-market.
He first helped scale the French market from 3 to 100 gross sales, then led much of Malt's international expansion, launching and structuring markets like Spain, Germany, Benelux, the Middle East, and the UK.
And in this episode, we'll talk about a challenge many teams face when expanding internationally, how to structure teams across countries, what to centralize versus localize, and how lessons from one market can shape success in the next.
Quentin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both for having me.
Let's get into it. So, Quentin, before we sort of talk more about the operational side of expansion, we're quite interested to know how you went from consultancy to building and scaling companies. How did that change come about?
Well, first, I was not the best consultant. I knew quite quickly that I would not make my career from consulting. I was too 80-20 and not detail-oriented for that. Changing slides after 11 p.m. was not my cup of tea. Some people love it, but I preferred more operational things, concrete things. And so I moved to Malt after meeting Vincent, our CEO, through an ex-McKinsey colleague. And immediately I felt in my element. Doing customer support at 7 p.m., HR in the morning, recruitment at lunch, and accounting in the afternoon, doing everything all at once and trying to solve things, solve problems as they came was really exciting. So yeah, I was very happy in the early days. It was a big risk. You mentioned that I joined Malt, but actually it was Hopwork when I joined. So we changed names on the way. And we were a team of 5.
Okay.
So it was very different. A lot of different backgrounds as well.
Yeah.
At McKinsey, we were all we looked all the same. We all came from the top 3 engineering or business schools. When I landed at Malt, I saw very various colleagues from different backgrounds, and it was very rich personally.
And you started first by helping scale France, so the core home market of Malt. How is it? What did you do first, and how is it different than then after that expanding into a new market?
So when I joined, we were 5 in the team, and I was acting as a CFO, CHRO, head of legal, head of sales, many hats,
a bit of everything.
So you got to test everything out before you found.
Problem-solving officer, and basically managing everything the founders didn't like or didn't want to manage. So they were really focused on the product, on the marketing, and I was handling pretty much the rest.
Okay.
So I grew the sales team. I created the revenue ops team. At the time, the revenue ops didn't really exist as a function in France. So it was just an extension of what I did to make the company work, to have the right data in place, the right dashboards, to feed into the business plan easily, to set up compensation plan for the sales, and so on and so forth. So it was really, we need to get things done and let's find a way to do it. Let's find a tool to use it. It's funny because it was in 2015 and I was one of the first users of Aircall, of Spendesk. I actually spent some time with Jonathan Angeloff on onboarding. I was a beta tester for Spendesk with Rodolphe. I was Alexandre Pro from Conto, came to the office at Malt to show me the first screens of Conto.
Okay.
Wow.
So it was really the start of what would become the French Next 40. Because every time we had a problem, every time was doing something manually, I tried to find a software or solution so that I didn't have to do it manually again.
Okay.
And so the first couple of years, we tested many nice solutions that became quite mainstream after that.
Okay. And when did you decide to expand and why?
So going back to your question on when we launched internationally, it started when we recruited a CFO and a CHRO. So after a fundraising of about 5 million with Serena Capital, we had enough money to hire people who were better than me at finance and HR. And I freed some of my agenda to focus on international expansion.
Okay.
It was also part of the deal with investors, obviously, to launch a new market. So we decided to launch in Spain.
Okay.
We talked about it in an event recently. I'm not sure I would launch the same country now, but in the end, all went well. Not according to plan, but all went well. So we decided to launch Spain in 2017, 2 years after I joined the company.
Okay.
And we launched in Spain because there was low competition. At the time, I thought it was a positive thing. Now I think the contrary.
Okay.
When you land in a market like the UK, where you have competitors, you just have to be better than them. And at Malt, we had a superior product, a superior value proposition. And so the market is already mature. In a new market with no competitor, you have to evangelize everyone. And it takes much longer. So there is a big opportunity, but it's a harder opportunity to grasp. So we launched Spain also because our founder, Vincent, spent years in Mexico. He spoke perfect Spanish with a Mexican accent. I did not notice, but our Spanish team noticed. And he felt more comfortable interviewing country managers in Spanish, which makes a lot of sense. You want to be comfortable and have trust when you launch your first market. It's a big milestone. And we also thought that Spain would be less expensive if we made some mistakes, and we did a lot of mistakes.
So it was helpful to start with Spain.
Yes,
even if you wouldn't do it, would not choose the same country today.
Exactly. Maybe the company would not have survived if we had launched Germany first or the UK, because it was very expensive, or we would have needed to raise money faster. Maybe at a time where it would not have been a good opportunity for us.
Yeah, and those mistakes you made in Spain, can you touch on any of them, like some kind of really obvious ones, or were they really like you were learning as you went and you were just kind of going mistake after mistake?
So we did several mistakes. Some of them we repeated in other markets. Some of them we didn't.
Because by mistake, or more because you're like, maybe it will hit in this market, so let's repeat that, or it was just kind of designed?
I think one part is localization of the product.
Yeah, okay,
Localization of the product is not only translation. Translation is very important, as you must know.
Yeah.
But it's not only that. It's adapting the legal framework, the payment, the UX. Sometimes, if you want to be German in Germany, you have to show trust on your website much more than in France. All the logos from a trusted third party, etc. That's very important. And I think we must invest more in localization. And in each country we go, we need to be German in Germany, we need to be British in the UK, we need to be Spanish in Spain, even Catalan in Catalan. A second mistake we did in most countries is we had maybe too high expectations on the targets for the countries. Because when you launch a new market, usually it's when you raise investments, and you are very bullish when you raise money. And you translate that pitch into targets for the country. And it can be frustrating, demotivating for people on the ground when they don't reach target, because we have smart people at the HQ. We've done that in multiple countries, so we should know how to set targets. And if we don't achieve them at the country, it's difficult. It's a failure. And it has a big impact on personal motivation and happiness of the team. I did tons of times the comparison between France in the early years and new markets to remind the team that it's normal what we're doing. Because when we launched, Netherlands, France, we were doing maybe 200, 300 million. And so when we have a target of 3 million in Netherlands, it seems super easy, super low. But the first year in France, we did less than a million. We did 3 million after 2 years and a half. We tend to believe that because we have a product that is more mature, of course, after years of development in the home market, the product will be more mature, and as a result, it will be easier to sell. But in reality, we had 80% of the value proposition in the first couple of years, and the rest is fine-tuning, which is essential if you want to get very big. It's super tough to launch a new market. Your question was what was different between France and Spain. First, you don't have the founders. And the founders, it's people who launched a company because they really understood the problem. They understood the personas, the clients and the users. They had a network, which is very important when you launch a company, when you're an entrepreneur and you're well-known. And on top of that, French media like to talk about French companies. So you need to bring some things different to the market, to the media, to pick their interest.
And French companies are famous for being very French. French market, I think, is big enough so you think you can sustain only with the French market at least the first few years, compared to, I don't know, Sweden, where they know from start they're international. They need to go from the first day international, otherwise it's too small, the Swedish market. How did you do? Was it a challenge for Malt as a French company to be more internationalized?
Definitely. And personally, I lived 3 years in the UK and I still don't speak proper English.
Naturally.
Actually, my daughter forbids me to read books in English because she can't understand me. People don't realize the amount of oral culture that happens in company, especially for onboarding, welcoming new joiners, and a proper onboarding process. But you don't realize the amount of knowledge that it transmitted after shadowing people, just being on the ground, asking questions. So first, it took a while to translate all our knowledge and to structure it. And when you are tight on budgets, the first jobs that you don't invest in are that, internal knowledge. I'm sure we can do without for 1 year, for 2 years, and then you end up having
no structure.
It's really difficult to maintain company knowledge if you are not very, very strict about it. And in France especially, when I went to Spain or when I went to Germany, every time I sat down with people at lunch, every time people switched to English immediately. Maybe it's because I was the boss. But I noticed it also with other colleagues. People are very mindful about that. When we were in France, no, it didn't happen. Even worse. We have a tradition at Malt. We do a karaoke every time for onboarding session. We used to do it for every new joiner, and people in France used to stop the songs from other language in German or Spanish and switch to French rap. That's very good.
I just wanted to circle back on kind of that internal knowledge, and how much of that did you let the local teams build up? Because obviously you're giving them the centralized local knowledge base, and then how are they adapting it? How are they putting in that localization element for that new market?
We didn't really localize it and created a new onboarding. They just built on what was existing. What is lacking sometimes it's sharing good practice. We do a really good case study with a client to explain them how much they're going to save by using Malt on admin, on contracting, etc. It was a very interesting exercise, but we didn't invest enough time to properly localize it, translate it in English, and then share it with other markets.
Of course.
And my sales team in charge of that, they had targets and they were behind on their targets. So they wouldn't invest time on doing that.
Of course. And if you had to advise a company today to change their organization because they raise money, they want to go to a new market, what do you think are the key things to do to make sure that the company, of course, outside the obvious, switch to English, have more, did you do, I don't know, do you advise for more feedback loops from the local team to the HQ or any other tips?
So first, you said French companies think that the French market is big enough, etc. And it's true. The French market is quite big, and you can build an amazing company just in France. So think twice about going international.
Okay.
Be careful not to do that for ego, because it's exciting. You know, when I met Vincent and he recruited me, he told me one day we'll have an office in Berlin, in London, and it felt exciting, you know, to be international. But some companies like Aramis Auto, for example, have been very successful just in France. For Malt, today we do almost 1 billion in sales, and it's still close to 800 million in France. So we could be a unicorn just in France. Launching internationally is incredibly hard. It takes a lot of time for the founders and the management team. And I think that's something that is always a bit overlooked. The amount of time that everyone will have to dedicate on that, you have to be ready. I'm always skeptical and impressed when it works about companies who launch several markets at once. Because you need to invest and have skin in the game and foot on the ground. And
I think as it's everyone's role, like the marketing, the sales team need to be on the ground. So if it's everybody's job, but as it's everybody's, it can be sometimes no one and fail because of that.
If it's everyone's responsibility, it's no one's responsibility, yes. So a few things that worked really well is to make sure people, the leadership team travels to the country to spend time with the local teams. And nothing beats meeting a client, meeting your users, or sitting face-to-face with someone from your team and feeling their pain because something is not working properly, because they get numerous feedback from clients and nothing has changed. And when people come back, they have plenty of ideas. And just, spending 2 days in a country, you will focus your to-do list on what you have to do for that country. It's natural. And personally, I was managing many markets. When I was sitting on my desk in France, I was doing things for the legal team, for the product team, for the finance team. I was not focusing enough on new clients, on new countries. But when I was in Madrid, when I was in Amsterdam, mentally, I switched and I was doing things for them. I was looking at my colleagues face-to-face and I need to do that for you. I'll do it right now. Meeting clients, again, there is a power to the anecdote. And so if you bring your chief product officer to a client and they explain their pain points, it will resonate much more and they will put it at the top of their agenda instead of if it's someone from the sales team explaining them the same thing.
A feedback ticket somewhere on the software.
Exactly. So making sure that you invite the senior leadership team to your market, and ideally you invite them to a few meetings with user and clients.
Great.
One thing that worked quite well as well is Vincent had the idea of organizing some of our leadership meetings and exco meetings in different countries. So we went to Germany to define our OKRs for, I think it was 2020, 2021 after COVID. And so we spent 3 days there. And so we defined our OKRs and a strategy for the company. And then we had one day where the JAMA team told us, this is our OKR, these are our priorities, these are our pain points.
To the whole team.
To the whole management team. And everyone in the management team had to commit on a few deliverables, few actions on each of those strategies, OKR directions.
That's
and it unlocked a lot of things. Because you commit all together and everyone had their priorities, but we have the German priorities. So we set up new legal frameworks as well, new payment options for mid-market, etc. It was very, very useful.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and about kind of humanizing the team on the ground. I think it's something we all forget because we're so set on automation and tools and contacting each other through Slack. But yeah, really bringing the team together in the home countries makes a lot of sense.
You don't build trust on Zoom.
Yeah. It's a good quote.
and talking about team, what do you think should be the minimum viable team when you start launching a new country? Do you need a team on the ground at the beginning, and if so, what are the key elements in that team?
So I'm a big believer in having a local team, and I'll be a bit provocative, but I think for me all functions needs to be local. It's important to have a community. As well for Malt, because we'll build community, and we also want to make Malt more human, versus all the marketplace that tend to be offshore, etc. Malt, we want to be close to our community, and marketing. So not all roles in marketing. I'd say it's important to have locally field marketing and communications. Then everything related to marketing ops, growth can be centralized and manage multiple markets, leveraging some freelancers or some agencies locally to have the right vocabulary, etc.
Yeah. And going back to Spain, so the first few years were a bit difficult. It was your first market. You learned a lot. Yes. Can you share a bit more about what went wrong, what you would do differently today?
First, I would travel personally much more. And that's why when we launched the UK, I moved with my family.
Okay.
Because in the first couple of years in Spain, I went there every couple of months or once a quarter.
Okay.
Just to check on the team, meet a couple of clients, and the rest I was doing remotely, and clearly it was not enough. Because I lived the story from day one in France. I knew that we decided to operate the marketplace in a way, for example, very open profile, or we started with SMB, or what type of service we offer to corporates, because it answered specific challenges from the French clients. And maybe those challenges are different in Spain. And it turned out that I discovered after 2 or 3 years that our legal model and the way we invoice clients could not work ever with corporate clients.
Okay. That's a bit late, yeah.
It was a big issue. But it took time to really understand that, because clients say, we can't pay you. Okay, why? And I only discovered what went wrong by really spending a couple of weeks on the ground, meeting clients and asking 5 times why, to understand the essence of what was wrong, to find out what we should change. And then it took another 6 months, 9 months to convince the headquarters why it was necessary.
Okay.
And getting the evidence was hard, because fundamentally we were changing our model from being a pure intermediary with no involvement on the project whatsoever, no involvement, no responsibility, to getting a bit more responsibility and becoming a part of the contract, going from a pure intermediary to a three-party contract.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a big change.
Which means more risks for Malt as a potential employer. We never had a single case in 10 years. So far so good, and we probably never will. But still, there was a bit of, the risk was higher, but it was the only way to work with corporates. So it took some time to get that idea across the board and across everyone who was in charge. And only I could do that. Because they had legitimacy, because I built the French model and I knew why we took that decision in France, and I knew that that decision didn't make sense in Spain.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say then, were you typically hiring less senior roles in local teams? So they're kind of doing more of the operational day-to-day, like you say, sales, they've got targets, and they don't see the bigger picture. So once you arrive, that's how you can identify these problems.
We had quite some senior people also in the team.
Okay.
Honestly, it's just that when you are so successful in your home market and you have a new market that for some reason it doesn't take off, and they are not very, very clear and precise in what's wrong. So it's difficult when you are in Paris to understand what is really, really important and what is just an excuse. It's almost impossible, honestly, to really find that. So of course, I prefer to recruit more senior. Always. Because especially in the early days, the team will grow. So there will be opportunities for everyone. I often recommend to people who want to launch in the US or in the UK, they don't travel there, they live there. You need to have some founders or some C-level who go and live there.
Especially in big markets like the US.
Exactly. And that's also how to make the feedback loop more efficient. Because if you have someone who can prioritize the feedback and list, the most important ones and push for them repeatedly. Because, communication is repetition. Even if I was in Spain, even if I was in the UK, some things took me a year to get across and to change.
Even if you knew the
Yeah,
HQ
even if I
team
knew.
and they had your trust. And
Exactly.
Okay. And when you launched the UK, when you switched from Spain to the UK, so you went there physically. And what else did you took from the learnings from Spain?
For Belgium, Netherlands, also we had some internal mobility. When I went to the UK, I took my best sales from Spain, one of the best employee from France, two of the best employees from France, and I was stealing, in the other teams. No, it was essential, and I couldn't have done it with those people. In the UK, we also had we built the UK on the acquisition of Comatch that we did. So there was already some revenue, and we didn't arrive with a 0 to 1 to achieve.
Okay,
we already have a team and some brand and some British employees, so it makes things easier.
Okay.
But one thing also we had to do in Spain is to change our targeting, our client targets. In France, we started with the SMB business, which was doing 80% of our revenues. SMB, very marketing driven, SEA, SEO, inbound. And we started to get some corporate clients. And in Spain, we realized after a couple of years, when I spent more time there, that the SMB business, the cohorts were ridiculous. We had no repeat. It was just pure investments at a loss. So we did have some revenues, but just because we spent more in marketing.
Okay.
And there was no hope of getting that money back down the line.
Okay.
So we took a bold decision to stop working on the SME market and focus entirely on corporate clients.
Okay.
We also introduced a higher pricing point. So at Malt, we originally took fees only on the freelancer side. Then we introduced fees on the client side.
Okay.
Because we had more and more services for corporates, which made a lot of sense. And corporates also have more willingness to pay versus freelancers. So we had prices at 5-7% for clients in France. And when I arrived in Spain, for the corporate clients, I said, okay, let's put 15% because they will negotiate down to 10%. And they didn't negotiate. And so we remained at 15%.
Okay.
And now progressively, we are rolling out this pricing point to other markets and lower the fees on the freelancer side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because for freelancers, 10% is...
And that learning of adapting the targets is something you took more care of when entering the UK, or because it was through buying a company, it was different?
For the pricing, we definitely learn on that and put higher pricing in new markets. Regarding setting achievable targets, unfortunately, no. It has been a pain point in all the markets I launched because it's almost impossible to convince the board that we need to grow at a reasonable pace at the beginning. We need to have high ambition because if you aim for 1 million, you'll get 800. Maybe if you reach for if you expect 500K, you will reach 600. So it's true that higher objectives means probably higher achievements. But if you don't have someone who can maintain the positive attitude, etc., it can backfire. So in the UK, it worked because I was deeply convinced it would work. And in the end, yes, the first couple of years, we were way below targets and the last market in the rankings. And last year, we were by far the number one in terms of growth. But it took 3 years. So no, it's
okay.
I would advise for new markets to avoid incentivizing the team on a target,
Okay.
but more on a percentage, on a commission of what they achieve.
Okay. Okay.
So that you don't visually make them, behind everyone in terms of target achievement, because it's really demotivating when you have a leaderboard for countries and you're at the bottom of the pack. It's demotivating.
I think as we're talking about the UK, I guess the big kind of question would be how did Brexit change operations? And was that a sort of a tricky moment?
I think the impact of Brexit is that we delayed the launch of the UK several years.
Yeah, okay.
When we launched our first market in 2017, so Brexit was just voted. It was 2016.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So it was out of question to launch in the UK because there was so much uncertainty about Brexit that we would have aimed for Germany or Spain, but not the UK. Second impact is it took me 6 months to get a visa and to relocate to the UK. It was quite stressful because my kids didn't have a school anymore, etc. So it was a bit stressful. And just that, the visa process to have internal mobility is quite painful. Apart from that, honestly, not much. Okay. There are some cultural differences in the UK. There are many books about that, but
did you particularly see that more in the UK than with Spain?
It's all markets have their specificities, honestly. Germany, Netherlands, UK, Spain, all of them, I discovered things. In Netherlands, people are very transactional.
Yes, yeah.
It's all about money, and I give you something, you give me something. Super transactional. In Germany, it's about building trust and understanding a lot of detail what will happen and what's the process before you commit. In Spain, it's super top-down and hierarchical. They still have a king, and you can actually feel it. Okay. If the boss doesn't see you, the deal will never happen.
Okay.
While in Germany, if you convince the people on the ground, operational people, then they will share their insights to the top and they will validate. So, but in Spain, it never happens if you don't speak to the boss. In the UK, it's possible to meet a lot of people, to have a lot of meetings, but then a lot of time nothing happens and people leave saying, interesting, it's been horrible and we'll never hear from you. You will never hear from me again. Don't take everything you read or everything people say you for granted in the UK.
Okay. And going back more on the local versus global, what do you think is the most important to stay, to keep local and to have local, and what can be global? Because in the end, of course, as you said, the ideal is have everything local.
Yes.
But it's not possible. You don't have the resources to do that, especially at the beginning.
But let's be honest, the reason why people are centralizing teams is because of cost. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's face it.
Yeah, so before we get to the quick fire questions, if you had to summarize your launch playbook today, knowing what you learned in Spain and UK, what would be your core principles?
Go fast with fractional resources. Send senior people and go there yourself.
Nice. Quentin, with every episode, we always end with our quick fire questions. So just sort of say what's on your mind, what comes to your mind. So first question, what's the biggest myth about international expansion?
That it's easier once a product is mature.
What's one mistake you could never repeat?
Not traveling enough.
Which market surprised you the most, for better or worse?
Netherlands, for the worst.
Okay. What's one thing every company should adapt but almost always forgets?
A karaoke playlist.
And your number one piece of advice for a team entering a new market?
Internal mobility and freelancers.
Perfect.
I'm not an employee at Malt. I really believe it's the way to go and the future of work.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quentin.
You. Yeah,
you're welcome. My pleasure.
So a really interesting conversation. One thing that stuck with me more from the beginning was no competition doesn't actually mean an easy ride into a new market.
I agree. And I remember travel more, which I think is good key takeaways, to travel more and to meet new cultures and to understand them and how each market is different, each way to sell, to market, to do legal is different in each market, and you need to be there to understand that.
Spend more time with your team, particularly more senior founders, people, because it sort of creates more motivation. You understand the problems quicker. Really, really sound advice.
And I love the having the offsite for the global C-level or even maybe the global team in one of the new markets is actually a very good idea so that people really can understand the importance of that new market and how different it can be.
Yeah, and interestingly, like we even see that firsthand with the example that Quentin, when he actually went to the UK, there was more, not instant success, but there was more understanding of the market. So it's a perfect sort of example of practice what you preach, and it's fruitful.
Even if the UK can be hard to understand.
Even if we're not very transparent and too polite.
No, very, very interesting episode. You can find all the resources from this episode in the show notes below. Thank you so much for joining us and see you next time.